If someone had told you in 1990 that a car had appeared on the streets of America that was faster than the Ferrari F40, more expensive than the Lamborghini Diablo, and looked like a stealth fighter crossed with a Lamborghini Countach and the cockpit of an F-16, most people would have called it marketing insanity. And yet that was exactly what the Vector W8 was. One of the most absurd, ambitious, and underrated supercars in automotive history. This was not another exotic Italian project or a limited production model from a major corporation. It was the American dream of one man, Gerald "Jerry" Wiegert, who decided to challenge Ferrari, Lamborghini, and Porsche by building his own supercar from scratch. He didn't just want to create a fast car. He wanted to build the best car in the world, the fastest, the most technologically advanced, and the most futuristic. The Vector W8 was supposed to prove that America could create something more than just a muscle car with a huge engine. It was meant to be a jet fighter on wheels. The problem was that a vision like that required not only enormous money, but also perfect execution. And that was exactly where the problems began. The same problems that made the Vector W8 both a legend and one of the greatest supercar failures of the 20th century. The story of Vector begins long before the W8 itself. As early as the beginning of the 1970s, Gerald Wiegert dreamed of creating an American supercar capable of competing with Europe's elite. After working at General Motors, he quickly realized he didn't want to be part of a giant corporation. He wanted to create his own brand and his own rules. In 1971, he founded Vehicle Design Force, which later became Vector Motors and eventually Vector Automotive Corporation. Just a year later, he revealed his first prototype, simply called the Vector. The car looked like a vehicle from the future, and even made the cover of Motor Trend magazine, but it was only a static mock-up, with no interior and no drivetrain. Even so, the project generated huge interest. Wiegert understood that design sells dreams, and what he was selling was a vision of the future. He drew inspiration from military aviation, supersonic fighter jets, and radical prototypes like the Alfa Romeo Carabo and Lancia Stratos Zero. The wedge-shaped silhouette, sharp lines, and dramatic proportions were meant to make his car look faster than anything else on the road. And it did, even before it could move. The second major step was the Vector W2, officially revealed in 1978. It became the direct predecessor of the later W8. At first, it was also just a static show car, but only a year later, a fully drivable example appeared, powered by a twin turbocharged GM V8. The W2 never entered full production, but it played a massive role in building the brand's legend. The car was tested for over 100,000 miles, more than 160,000 kilometers, which was almost unbelievable for such a niche prototype. It regularly appeared in automotive magazines, caused a sensation at car shows, and started building Vector's image as America's answer to Lamborghini. Wiegert even claimed the W2 could reach speeds close to 390 kilometers per hour, although nobody ever truly confirmed that. It didn't matter for marketing. There was just one problem: money. The 1980s were spent mostly searching for funding, selling shares, fighting lawsuits, and desperately trying to keep the company alive. Wiegert refused compromise, and perfection was incredibly expensive. The breakthrough finally came at the end of the 1980s, when the company was restructured as Vector Automotive Corporation, and real financing became possible. A public stock offering brought in around $6 million, and successful lawsuits against companies like Goodyear and Vantage Cigarettes added more financial support. Thanks to that, Wiegert could finally move from dreams to production. In 1989, the world saw the Vector W8 Twin Turbo, the first true production car from the brand. It was a far more developed and refined successor to the W2, although stylistically the two remained very close. The W8 was meant to be a car without compromise. Wiegert openly said he wanted to create a fighter jet for the street. That sentence perfectly defined the entire project. The W8 was not supposed to resemble Ferrari or Lamborghini. It had to look more aggressive, more futuristic, and more extreme. And even today, its shape looks more like something from a science fiction video game than a car from over 30 years ago. The body of the Vector W8 was absolute madness for its time. The car was built around a semi-aluminum monocoque using honeycomb construction. Aluminum panels with a honeycomb structure reinforced by a steel frame and an integrated safety cage. Everything was assembled using thousands of aerospace rivets and epoxy bonding, exactly like in aviation. The chassis structure itself weighed only around 160 kilograms. The body panels were made from Kevlar, carbon fiber, fiberglass, and S-glass composites, which in the early 1990s felt almost like space-age technology. The drag coefficient was around 0.32, and Wiegert proudly claimed the car passed DOT testing and became the first vehicle to complete both front and rear crash tests using the same example. Its wedge-shaped body, scissor doors, huge rear wing, triple windshield wipers, and aggressive styling made the Vector look more like a military prototype than a road-going civilian car. But the biggest excitement came from the engine. Mounted in the center of the car, ahead of the rear axle and behind the driver, was a massive 6.0-liter V8 based on a General Motors unit, but heavily rebuilt by specialists at Rodec. It featured an aluminum block, forged crankshaft, forged pistons, steel valves, Carrillo rods, dry sump lubrication, and twin Garrett I Research H3 turbochargers. This made it far more of a race engine than a road engine. Official output was around 625 horsepower at 5,700 revolutions per minute and roughly 880 newton-meters of torque. The driver could even adjust turbo boost pressure from inside the cabin, and at higher boost settings, some sources claimed the engine could produce over 1,000 horsepower. These numbers were absolutely absurd for the late 1980s and early 1990s. For comparison, the Ferrari F40 had around 478 horsepower, while the Lamborghini Diablo had around 492 horsepower. Vector didn't just want to compete with Europe, it wanted to humiliate it. The most controversial technical element was the transmission. Instead of the manual gearbox expected in a supercar of this class, the Vector received a 3-speed turbo-hydromatic automatic originally derived from the Oldsmobile Toronado of the 1960s. Of course, it was heavily rebuilt, reinforced, and adapted for the enormous torque, but it was still a 3-speed automatic. Wiegert argued that with so much torque, more gears were unnecessary, and the solution was more reliable. Ironically, the transmission became one of the W8's biggest problems. Journalists from Car and Driver experienced serious gearbox failures during testing, including disappearing third gear and problems with reverse. The car also had overheating issues. These problems damaged the car's reputation badly, even though its performance remained extremely impressive. 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in around 3.8 seconds, and the quarter mile in 12 seconds were absolutely top-level numbers. The suspension also showed how obsessive Wiegert was about details. At the front, the car used independent double wishbone suspension, while at the rear, it featured a Didion axle with 4 longitudinal links and additional stabilizers. There were adjustable Coney dampers, concentric springs, and the ability to fine-tune damping characteristics. Braking came from huge 13-inch ventilated brake discs with 4-piston aluminum calipers. The wheels were almost absurdly wide for the era. Rear Michelin XGT Plus tires in size 315/40 mounted on 16-inch wheels. The W8 was designed not only to look extreme, but also to behave like a true supercar. Road and Track praised its stability, balance, and handling, noting that despite its brutal power, the Vector was not an unpredictable monster. It was fast, but surprisingly composed. The problem was that its complexity and hand-built nature made every repair extremely expensive. The interior was probably the craziest part of the entire car. The cabin looked more like the cockpit of an F-16 fighter jet than the interior of a supercar. Instead of traditional gauges, the driver faced a digital display inspired by military aviation, surrounded by dozens of switches, buttons, and circuit breakers that looked like aircraft controls. The Recaro seats were power-adjustable, heated, and wrapped in high-quality leather, while suede trim, air conditioning, cruise control, Sony or Blaupunkt audio systems, and even optional satellite phone and rearview camera completed the experience. The gear selector was mounted on the driver's left side, on the side sill, which was as strange as it was dramatic. Wiegert wanted the driver to feel like a fighter pilot, and he absolutely achieved that. This interior looked like nothing else on the market. It was weird, theatrical, and completely unforgettable. The biggest problem for Vector, however, was not the technology itself, but the economics behind it. The car was brutally expensive to build. The planned price was initially around $250,000, but reality quickly destroyed that estimate. Before long, the price had climbed beyond $450,000, and some examples approached $500,000. That meant the W8 was more expensive than a Lamborghini Diablo and close to Ferrari F40 territory. But Ferrari and Lamborghini had reputation, history, and global customer networks. Vector was a small California company with huge ambition and very limited production capacity. Each car was hand-built almost like a prototype, which meant long waiting times and unpredictable quality. Buyers wanted exotic drama, but for $500,000, they also expected perfection. And that was something a small manufacturer could not always deliver. The symbol of Vector's problems became the story of Andre Agassi. The famous tennis player ordered a Vector W8 and pushed hard for fast delivery. The company warned him that the car still needed final setup and testing, and that his example was not yet ready for full use. Agassi ignored the warnings and began driving it normally. Soon, the car suffered from overheating, and according to different accounts, there was even an engine bay fire or melted trim caused by the hot exhaust system. The story became public. Agassi demanded a refund, and he got back more than $400,000. For Vector, it was a public relations disaster. The press immediately seized on the story and began portraying the W8 as a beautiful but unreliable millionaire's toy. In the supercar world, reputation is everything, and Vector was losing it. Production ended quickly. Between 1989 and 1993, only 17 customer cars and 2 pre-production prototypes were built, although some sources list 22 examples when including the W2, test cars, and transitional versions. The safest conclusion is that only 17 true production W8s were made. That makes it one of the rarest supercars of its era. In 1993, the company entered receivership, and control was taken by the Indonesian company Megatech, which also owned Lamborghini at the time. Jerry Wiegert was pushed out of his own company, and under new management, Vector later created the M12, based partly on Lamborghini Diablo technology. But that was no longer the same Vector. The W8 remained Wiegert's last true car, his most personal project, and at the same time, his greatest success and greatest failure. Today, the value of the Vector W8 is enormous and still rising. Back in 2010, R.M. Sotheby's sold one example for around £179,000, but the market quickly changed. In 2014, a red example sold for around $275,000, and in 2020, a purple W8 sold for around $720,000. Chassis number 001, the first production car, originally owned by a member of the Saudi royal family, later attracted major attention at auction, with estimates reaching toward $1 million. Some exceptional examples with perfect history can now exceed $1.5 million, and failed attempts to sell cars above the $1 million mark only prove how strong its collector status has become. The Vector W8 is no longer just a car. It is an artifact of an era, a symbol of wild ambition, technological obsession, and an automotive ego larger than the engine itself. Today, the Vector W8 remains one of the most fascinating supercars in history. It didn't conquer the market, it didn't defeat Ferrari, and it didn't build a great empire. But it did something just as important. It proved that the car world needs mad visionaries. It needs people who ignore common sense and try to build the impossible. The W8 was imperfect, sometimes unreliable, and at times completely absurd. But that is exactly why it made a stronger mark on history than many flawless machines. It was not just transportation, it was a manifesto. Proof that one man could fight for his dream for nearly 20 years and actually put it on wheels. To some, it was the strangest supercar in the world. To others, it was the greatest American exotic ever built. But no matter how you see it, one thing is certain. The Vector W8 is not a car you forget. It is a car that still looks like it arrived from the future.